In today's session, I want to talk about something that I'm quite passionate about, which is actually SharePoint, right? And what I've been seeing lately is that many people just start using Teams without not really understanding SharePoint and how it all fits together. Now, that's all good and well as technology kind of allows us to do that. But I did think that it's very important that I share 10 very crucial things that I think you should know about SharePoint if you want to use Microsoft Teams. So let's get started. When a Microsoft team is created, it creates a SharePoint site collection in the background. Now, of course, there's much more to it than just a SharePoint site collection. I mean, that team creates an Office 365 group, which we're going to talk about in a moment. It creates a shared mailbox. It creates a shared calendar. It gives you a group in Microsoft Stream. It gives you a workspace in Power BI. It gives you great engagement or interaction or integration with Forms and Stream and Sway. You can also add Microsoft Lists and use OneNote and Planner and start automating things. And of course, you've got access to other files and things. I mean, I listed Skype there, but of course, we know that Skype for Business is rebuilt inside of Teams. You can bring Yammer in there as well. There's a certain form of email integration. I can find the employees that I work with, use the WhoBot. I can see information about them. I can see all my files in the cloud, so OneDrive, Teams, etc., SharePoint. And then, of course, the co-authoring abilities inside of Teams is phenomenal. Okay, so working with documents in Teams is phenomenal. But the important thing is that when the team is created, it creates a SharePoint site collection behind it. So what happens when you create channels, and these are channels, is that it creates a folder in a SharePoint library in SharePoint. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to open up the SharePoint site behind it. So I'll just go to General, I'm going to go to Files, and I'm going to click on Open in SharePoint. So there we go. It's opened up SharePoint on the specific file or channel that I stood on when I opened it. So if I navigate one step back, if I go back to Documents, it's going to then show me all the folders in my team in that channels, which we're going to discuss now in a moment as well. So I want you to keep in mind is that every channel that you creates a root folder in the document library inside of your SharePoint site. Okay, so when I think of those folders behind the channels, what's very, very important for me is firstly is for you to understand that each of those are what I would consider a root folder. Then also think of it that if you create subfolders, so there you can see I'm in General and there's 2 folders in there. If I share content in this general channel, it won't put it in one of the subfolders, it's going to put it outside of the subfolder. So if you want to use subfolders, you have to first come and load it here in the subfolder, and then you can share it in the channel by attaching it as a link to a conversation. But if you then just add a document here, it's going to put it in the root folder, not in the subfolder. So please take note of that. I think that's very, very important for me. Then also, while I'm on the channels, the deleting and renaming of channels is a little bit of a dangerous thing. Okay, so if I go and I just open up SharePoint again, so if I look at those folders in SharePoint and I look at my channels in Teams, you'll see that there's a slight difference. So I went and did a couple of tests for you. I created 4 channels, the one channel to delete with content, channel to delete without content, rename with content, rename without content, to show you what the difference is and what happens. If I delete the channel in Teams, it doesn't delete the folder in SharePoint, regardless of whether it's got content in it or not. Okay, that's important to know. It does not delete the folder or subfolders in SharePoint. It only deletes it on the team side. Also, if I rename a channel in Teams, it doesn't rename the folder in SharePoint. So this could cause confusion for people. I would rather, I think, if you get to a point you go like, yeah, we shouldn't have created that channel, then I would rather say, guys, let's go and take a look at the documents that's in that channel. So let's see if I've got documents inside of reporting. So let's say you don't want the reporting channel anymore. Then create the channel that you want and then move these items first to that channel before you then go and I've got to do it one by one. Before you then go and delete that channel. Okay, so you can see there, I just want to see, I think it's because there's content in it. So there you can see you can move. So move your content across to the other channel first before you delete it, and then make sure that you go to SharePoint and delete it as well. So please, if you do, I'd rather delete a channel and recreate it and rename it. I definitely wouldn't rename channels. I'd rather delete it. But remember, if you delete a channel, you delete the conversations as well. So I suppose sometimes it's important to keep the channel, but make sure that people understand it doesn't rename the folder in SharePoint, and it also doesn't delete the folders in SharePoint. Okay, so that's very, very important for me to. While I'm on the channels, creating private channels, you need to know this. If you create a private channel, because you only want 2 of the 10 people to have access to it, it creates a separate SharePoint site collection. Separate SharePoint site collection. So like I have a SharePoint site here for human resources. There's my SharePoint site. It's got a landing page. I've obviously done lots of crazy stuff on the site already. It's got a landing page and everything. If you create a private channel, it creates a separate SharePoint site collection. I'm not fond of creating private channels, and I don't know if I should discuss that right here now or not. I would rather create a separate team. It's going to create a separate SharePoint site collection anyway, so I'd rather keep the content separate. I think the challenge for me with private channels is, even though it shows a little lock next to it, people can very easily get confused and post something in the wrong channel because they have access to both. So please be very careful of creating private channels. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention, is the SharePoint site behind it, as well as the folders that it creates in the document library. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about is the Office 365 group. When a team is created, it creates an Office 365 group. So there's now an Office 365 group called Human Resources. Think of that as your old security groups, okay, that you use for your file shares, etc., or like an Azure Active Directory type of permissions group, if you want to think of it that way. So there's a permissions group in the background, which means that every team, if I go to Manage Team, you'll see that there's a list of team members and owners, okay? And these people have access to edit and delete everything in the team. Apart from the settings here, you might say that people can't add tabs and they can't add channels, but when it comes to the content, all the members and owners can edit and delete everything. What I don't want you to do is to start messing with the permissions. So we need to start learning to trust people. And I know that you're not going to like that, but there's a lot of cool things you can put in place to help you trust the technology and the people. So what I don't want you to do is to start messing with the channel permissions by going to SharePoint. So if I go to SharePoint, I don't want you to now go to the documents library. And I just want to, I've obviously messed with this SharePoint site, don't make a mistake. I don't want you to go to that document library and then say that, oh, you're going to share this folder with a different group of people or something. I know that you can, and I know a lot of people say that they do. Just don't do it. So now you've got a team with 10 members in it, and now you want to share a specific folder or a document with an external group. The problem with that is that your team doesn't necessarily know that, and they can't see that on the folder. So they might be putting stuff in there, or might be making changes to a document because they're not aware that it's been shared with another group. For me, best practice, and yeah, you're not going to like this, I would rather put a copy of that in my OneDrive and share it with the people. I know it's a copy that you're putting out. I do not compromise the permissions on my SharePoint site by messing with the permissions. My business rules are always all the members and the owners on the team can see everything in the team or the SharePoint site. If I want something to have business rules, it would be possibly a private channel, which I don't like, or a separate team, or a separate folder in OneDrive, or a separate SharePoint site. So don't mess with the permissions, because you're going to end up adding that to your job description, is to manage those permissions. So please don't do it. That's number 2. Office 365 groups and permission. Very, very important for me that you are aware of these things. The third thing I want you to be aware of from a SharePoint point is that library that sits behind the team actually sits on SharePoint. Teams is just a UI front end that brings everything together. It keeps 500 electronic versions of the documents in that library, 500 electronic versions. So if I go to the settings on this library, I'm going to open up the settings, library settings, and I'm going to go to versioning. You'll see that it's set to 500 by default, 500 electronic versions. If you do have a compliance or auditory type requirement where you have to keep every single version and it might be more than 500, you can set this up to 50,000. It'll allow you to set it up to 50,000. Okay, so remember that the SharePoint site collection, the document library behind the team, has 500 versions. You can change that to have higher number of versions. Okay, then that document library, let me just go back to the library. That document library You can access this library from your File Explorer. So a lot of us works with bulk loads of documents, and it's easier to work in File Explorer, which means that I can click on Sync, and it's then going to use my OneDrive client and sync it down to my PC. Very, very cool thing. Sadly, a lot of companies don't allow this because they don't trust their users. So how about training them so that you can trust them and putting some controls in place, which I'll show you as well. So if I go to my OneDrive now, I will see, and I just want to find it quickly. So if I go to my OneDrive, I will now see in my OneDrive, I have an area called the good stuff, which is my company name. So that would be your company name. And then it shows me a folder for each of the teams that I've synced down to my PC. So there's human resources on my PC now. Pretty cool, right? Which means the saving of content, moving of content there, if you have to do some migrations from old systems, works much easier in this environment. The challenge with this is, people, do you see that little blue cloud there? It means that it keeps in touch with the SharePoint site collection. That's the owner. So if I wanted to say, oh, I don't belong to human resources anymore, I'm going to delete all of this, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to delete everything on the site. So if there's a Teams library or a SharePoint library that's been synced down to your PC, to stop the sync before you remove it, you have to do this. Go to OneDrive, go to the settings, go to settings there, and then stop the sync here first. So I'm going to find that HR resources. There we go. Stop sync. Stop sync. Yes. And then I always check it first, people. I first go back to settings and I make sure that it doesn't show here anymore. Because then I know, nope, it's definitely not available anymore. And if I go back to human resources there, you'll see that the sync status doesn't show anymore, which means it doesn't sync back to the site anymore. And that means I can then right click on that team and delete that whole subset of folders without it deleting anything on the site. So I can sync the library down to my PC. It's a pretty cool thing to do. It's much easier to work with. And of course, it's going to help people just work a lot faster. Okay, so I definitely can do that. While I'm on that though, is now everyone's going to stress about people deleting stuff off the Explorers. Then do the following, especially as a team owner. When I get added to a team, the first thing I do is that I navigate to the SharePoint site. And remember, it's going to open up in the channel that you're in when you open up SharePoint. So I'm going to navigate back to Documents. Then I'm going to go and say, Alert Me. Because it exists for years and years. I'm going to say, I'm going to just change my alert, HR Documents deleted. Okay? I do not want to be notified of all changes. It's going to drive me crazy. I only want to know when items are deleted. I don't want to know immediately. Well, I want to know if all items are deleted, of course, but I don't want to know immediately. They can send me a weekly summary. Okay, so set up an alert on your site to help your people. That's the fifth thing that I want you to know. Set up an alert on the team to notify you if bulk amounts of content gets deleted. Okay, and I'm going to send a weekly summary, 7 days, because sixth thing I want you to know, recycle bin. There's a recycle bin available for you to restore content from. So if I go to the SharePoint site, and I go to site contents, it normally actually sits on the left-hand side there, but I've broken my site, obviously. You'll see that there's recycle bin, which means that within 93 days, it keeps it for 93 days, I can select something and restore it, and it'll put it back to where it was. So within 93 days, I can just restore any content that was deleted. So stop being afraid that people are going to delete things and not let them use the technology like it's meant to be used. Okay? Let them have the rights. Don't mess with permissions if it's not necessary, okay? Then rather set up an alert and notify you once a week if a lot of stuff gets deleted. So that's super, super important for me. Then, number 7, okay, is that there's a lot of other things you can do on the SharePoint site as well. So if I go to the home page, and then, man, this is such a bad example. I should open up another one. I'm going to open up another site because I definitely broke that team. So let me just go to Files and open up in SharePoint. If I open up the SharePoint site behind it, this is a Microsoft Teams site, okay? I'm going to just navigate back to the home page. This is the home page of my team, okay? So this is the home page of my team, which means that I can also add other things here. I can add cool things as web parts on the landing page if I edit the page. And I can, of course, add this home page on a team. So if I'm on a team and I wanted the home page there, I could go to add a tab. I could go to SharePoint, It's going to ask me relevant or my own link, because I can add another site as well. I'm going to say I want to add that specific home site, and I want to add the home page, which means you can bring in the home page of your team site into the team as well, in case you have cool resources and things on that. Maybe you want to build a quick links web part with a lot of resources that everyone uses. So just bring the home site right into the team, because that will definitely add a lot of value. Number 8 that I want to talk about, I just quickly mentioned it, is that I can edit that home page. So for example, if you wanted to bring in a nice web part like quick links with all the resources that you use, or the Yammer web part or Twitter feed or something, because you can do it as tabs as well, of course you can do this. So if I edit this page, you'll see that I have many types of web parts that I can add. So if I look at that, I'm going to just expand this and show you the list of all the web parts. So many cool web parts that can be added. Power BI dashboards as well, which I think somewhere else. RSS feeds, I mean Twitter, quick links, so cool. Lots and lots and lots of cool web parts, other libraries, etc. So a lot of very cool things that, that can be added to that page. So you can go and modify this page, and you can then add it as a tab to your team. The 9th thing I want to tell you about SharePoint that you should know in Teams is that I can build other apps as well. If I go to that little settings wheel and I go add an app, this actually shows me some apps that I can build. So let's say I wanted another document library for different documents. So I'm going to call this project plans, okay? I need to rename apps, you know, that's still an old habit. So normally I would just rename this app. I like short URLs, okay, but that's me. So I'm going to say that this library is separate. I didn't want to use it because I want some metadata on it. So project plans. And then, for example, on this library, I could add metadata. So maybe I want a column in there that says client. I don't know, I'm going to just put it a single line text for now, but it would be better as a choice. And I could have another column that says project name. It's just an example. Again, I'd rather do a choice, but I'm going to just leave it a single line of text now. And then I could even add a column for update date. Okay, so that would be a date. And take a note, I did a cool blog a couple of days ago about building out a PMO system in your teams. Okay, so that could be quite a cool thing. But just to show you this basics, if I then go and upload a document here, so let's go and find a document that I can... Okay, so there's my document, which means because I used metadata, I can obviously now add metadata. So I'm going to say the client was ABC suppliers, the project is... And oopsie, the project name is D365 deploy, for example, and the update date, oopsie, could be that this was the project plan for the 28th of. So there you can see I can then bring metadata into libraries as well. So I can build other apps as well and add them to the team. So if I go to the team, we know that there is a list of folders that sits behind that team, but nothing stops me to now add another library on here. So it doesn't sit behind the channels. So I can say, where is it? I'm pretty sure I'm just missing it. There we go. So it's going to look at the existing site first. So I'm going to say which one? Oh, it's the, what am I on? Project management. Next. And this is the project plans. Library I want to add. So remember, very, very important, the 9th thing I want you to know is that you can add other libraries to this as well. You'll see that it's just bringing the library view in. So sometimes I'm sneaky to do this different. If I'm using views in this, I've created nice views and things, I'm going to grab that URL and add it differently to the team. So if I had to add this as a website, for example, it works a little bit different. But I could just add the link as a website. I'm going to just call this project, which means it doesn't then just bring the normal library view in. You're going to see it brings in the metadata view. See there. So I prefer to add them as websites if I have libraries with different metadata to it. So I can build other apps on SharePoint as well, and also add them to my team. You don't have to just use the library that sits behind the channels. So that's great behind the channels, but maybe you need a separate library or a list for something else. And that obviously goes for Microsoft lists as well that you can create, because that also gets created on SharePoint, but that's similar to what we used to call a custom list in SharePoint. And again, remember that we used to go, so that's definitely the ninth thing I wanted to bring your attention to, is that we used to go and change or build custom lists. Now, if I look at this Microsoft list that I built, that I shared in my blog the other day, like 2 days ago or 3 days ago, this specific list that I built there, remember, it's still actually built on SharePoint. So if I go to Files, Open in SharePoint, oh, I could have done that on the list, sorry. I'm going to go to the site content, and I'm going to go to that project dashboard list that I've built with Microsoft Lists in Teams. Remember that you can change further settings in SharePoint. So if I go to the settings wheel and I go to list settings, there's the columns that was built in that. Even though you built it in Teams, this is what it looks like on SharePoint. So sometimes I prefer to work here. I prefer to add my multiple lines of text here, and I prefer to build my views here. Okay, so if you build Microsoft Lists, you can still navigate to SharePoint and do more on the list settings in SharePoint currently, because of course they're going to bring more and more features into Teams. I mean, that makes absolutely sense for them to do that. And that brings me, that was actually number 10. That absolutely brings me to my top 10 things that I think everyone should know. Okay, so I do hope that that's given you some more insights into Teams that you might not have known. A good friend of mine, Matthew Levy, in a UG the other day said to me that the analogy that he uses is that imagine someone goes for their driver's license, and it's for an automatic car, and then as soon as they have their license, they start driving manual cars. I think it's important that you learn some of these things in the background. Even though it's easy to drive this manually inside of Teams, I do think you need to, or automatically, I do think you need to know some of the settings in the background that can help you do this better, because otherwise you actually might be able to do more damage than good. So that's my top 10 things. Somewhere I did lose a number, but there's definitely 10 of them. That's my top 10 things that I do think you need to know about SharePoint when you're using Microsoft Teams. Have a great day.